Great Britain's history is full of success, prosperity, and dominance. It was one of the world's greatest power for many years. As the old saying goes, the sun never sets on the British Empire. The British ruled lands all across the earth. It was very powerful, and a lot of this power stemmed from the nation's greed. In these pictures, you can see just how powerful the British were. India, which is all red, and even some of the land down here, that was all claimed by the British nation, all imperialized by the British. And also everything pink in this picture. This is Africa. All of the pink countries were all imperialized by the British. So that is a lot of land outside of Great Britain that they owned and that they were ruling over in the late 19th century. Though the British have essentially a successful track record, not everything they have accomplished was positive, such as British imperialism of Africa and Asia in the late 19th century. Many people argue about Great Britain's imperialism of those two continents during the late 19th century and whether it was beneficial or detrimental. Imperialism may have seemed like a good idea to the British at the time, but in hindsight, it's obvious that the detriments outweighed the benefits. Although Great Britain's imperialism was profitable action for themselves, it caused major drawbacks to the nations of the natives of Africa and Asia during the late 19th century. The first reason it was not beneficial was because Great Britain came into Africa and Asia with disregard to the feelings and views of the natives. Their goal was not to preserve the cultures of the locals. They wanted to transform them. They wanted to make the natives of Africa and Asia like the British. Great Britain's arrogance is a primary motive of their desire to imperialize Africa and Asia. The British had the intention of helping the countries less fortunate than they. In the poem A White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling, he exclaims, "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed, bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need." The British's disdain is evident throughout this passage. He's just exclaiming how the white men of Great Britain need to go out and help the lesser breeds, the lesser races. Racism is also a conspicuous motive of the British. It's quite obvious that they view anyone who is not a white man as inferior to them. The Africans and Asians are not capable of being a civil people, so they must step in and guide them in the right direction. They truly thought they were helping the natives by bestowing their wonderful knowledge upon them, but they didn't realize the harm that they were simultaneously committing. While they were imperializing the countries, they were also taking away their cultures and their individuality. The second reason British imperialization was not a good idea was that the British were also very ignorant and disrespectful coming into the foreign lands, especially in Africa. They disrupted the Africans' way of life, taking over their land, which to the Africans it couldn't be bought or traded. Their land was sacred to them. It not only belonged to the people residing on it at the time, but also their ancestors and their kids to come. So land to the Africans wasn't something that you could just strip it of its natural resources. It was part of their culture and of their ancestors, and it was really devastating whenever the British took it away. This was not the only disruption the British made. The native Africans already had local established government, but the British interrupted it and appointed new British rulers among the tribes. Although the natives already had a peaceful way of ruling their people, the British completely changed it. In the article The Coming of the Pink Cheeks, which is written from African Chief Kabonga's point of view, he says, "What magic had this son of my father made that he who is not yet an elder should be made leader over us all who are so much older and wiser in the ways of our people?" So in this, he's just showing his devastation and unbelief that people from a completely different land would come in and take over their tribes when they don't know how to work anything or how things have been done for hundreds of years. So that just shows his devastation. This change of power left the natives confused and devastated, wondering why their world as they knew it was coming to an end. The third reason that imperialization was detrimental was because the Great Britain promised many things to the African and Asian countries under their control that caused disunity and distrust among the people groups. They promised them that they would be able to hold high political positions under the new British-controlled governments. This would have given them a sort of ownership in their own governments in their homelands. Instead, they were forced and oppressed to follow the rules and regulations set in place by the British government on their own land. So what the British had promised was that they would allow them to have most of the power in their land, but the British actually lied. And instead of the Africans and Asians feeling like they were in control, the British just took over and went back on their word. Another large problem that arose was that the rising of taxes were falling on the shoulders of already financially failing countries. In India, for example, what was happening is that the taxes were being raised on the local people, but the British government was not providing the means by which to pay them, and that was quoted from the article The Benefits of British Rule, 1871. This showed the way the British government was not worried about the countries they were imperializing, rather they were concerned with what they acquired from those countries. The fourth reason imperialization was detrimental was Great Britain's greed and ignorance. That also played a significant role in the damage of those two continents' countries by the British. The British had no intention of preserving the natives' land. Instead, they took it for all it was worth, stripping their homeland of its natural resources. And this also led to severe famine and droughts in many countries. Though this was a major reason for many African and Asian deaths in the late 19th century, it wasn't the only one. Another reason for the major deaths in those countries was that they were forced to fight in wars that were not theirs. The British forced the men in their imperialized countries to fight their battles since they were supposedly part of Britain. Despite what the British said, the lives of the Africans and Asians were not a priority to the British because they weren't actually white. They just needed bodies to fight, so they took advantage of the natives. This reflects the British people's racism, too. Despite the obvious detriments of the late 19th century imperialism, many scholars still argue that it ultimately benefited the people of Africa and Asia. They argue that without Great Britain's interruption, countries in Africa and Asia would not be industrialized, medically advanced, or educated like they are today. That might be true, although the African and Asian countries weren't given a chance to flourish and industrialize on their own before the British just came in and demanded it. This may be true, but at what cost did they gain these things? The British stripped the natives of everything they had ever known and changed their way of life. They were forced to conform to the ways of people that they had no desire to be like or be ruled by. The things Africa and Asia gained from imperialism are little compared to what they lost. Instead of gaining industrialization, medical advances, and better education, they still lost their own culture and their individuality and their chance to flourish on their own before the British came in and did it on their own. Great Britain's imperialism has greatly affected the countries of Africa and Asia in a negative way. Britain's little regard for the land and people themselves of Africa and Asia is one of the reasons for the political unrest seen in the following years of the Africa and Asians. The British government was more worried about the acquisition of land and wealth than the people groups and cultures they were destroying in the process. All in all, opposed to the popular belief, the imperialism in the 18th and 19th century by the British has far greater negative impacts than positive.